Back in the fall of 1918, a single massive battle would not only help end the First World War, but would also be written in blood as America's deadliest. We're talking about the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, a brutal victory that really changed America's place in the world forever. Just think about this number for a second. 1.2 million. That's how many American soldiers were thrown into this one offensive. To put that in perspective, America had only jumped into the war about a year earlier with a pretty tiny professional army. This was a nation mobilizing on a scale nobody had ever seen before.
And the cost, wow. In just 47 days, 26,277 of them were killed. That number is staggering. It rivals entire campaigns from other wars. And for a whole generation of Americans, it was a brutal, shocking introduction to the absolute horror of industrial warfare.
So, that's the big question, right? How did this horrifying baptism by fire, for what was still a pretty new American army, become the decisive blow that finally helped bring the First World War to an end?
Okay, to really get this battle, you have to understand the moment it all went down. By late 1918, the Great War was at a serious tipping point, and this offensive, well, it was the Allies' final all-or-nothing gamble to break the stalemate for good. You have to remember, for 4 long, brutal years, Europe had been bleeding out in the trenches. The Western Front was this massive scar across the continent, a seemingly endless line of mud, barbed wire, and death. Advances were measured in yards, not miles, and they came at the cost of millions of lives. And the ultimate obstacle was the Hindenburg Line. Now, this wasn't just another trench. This thing was a fortress, a complex, layered system of defense that was literally designed to be unbreakable, to bleed the Allies white and force some kind of negotiated peace. To the guys who had to attack it, it must have seemed impossible. So, the Allied plan was incredibly audacious. They decided to hit that line everywhere, all at once, in a huge series of coordinated attacks they called the 100 Days Offensive. And the Meuse-Argonne, that was the critical, American-led pincer attack in this grand strategy. It was designed to be the final blow that shattered the German army's will to fight. The success of this whole gamble really depended on the American Expeditionary Forces, the AEF. They were thrown into the toughest, most difficult sector of the front, and they were about to face their ultimate test in what would become America's largest and deadliest battle. You know, the contrast between the two armies was pretty stark. On one hand, you have the Americans, overwhelming numbers, super high morale, eager to fight. But most of them were basically citizen soldiers, green as grass, drafted and trained in just a few months. And they were going up against battle-hardened German veterans who, were worn down and depleted, but were dug into some of the most formidable defenses ever built. It was raw power versus hardened experience. So what was the objective? Well, it was strategically brilliant but brutally direct. They had to punch north, straight through the treacherous Argonne forest, pierce the Hindenburg Line, and grab the critical railway hub at a town called Sedan. If they could take Sedan, they'd trap a huge part of the German army, cutting them off from all their supplies and reinforcements. Game over. All right, so the whistle blows on September 26, 1918. But what came next wasn't some swift, clean victory. Oh, no. What followed was a 47-day meat grinder that tested the American forces to their absolute breaking point. The offensive kicked off with one of the most massive artillery barrages in history. And just try to wrap your head around this stat. In only 3 hours, more artillery shells were fired than in the entire 4 years of the American Civil War. The sheer scale of it is just mind-boggling. And you gotta understand, this wasn't over in a day. It was a grueling 47-day campaign fought in 3 distinct phases. Phase 1 saw some initial gains, but also ran into incredibly fierce resistance. Phase 2 was just a series of bloody head-on attacks against the main German defenses. And Phase 3, that was the final desperate push to break through for good. The reality on the ground was pure chaos. The American staff was inexperienced, and the roads were just destroyed, leading to these massive traffic jams that blocked supplies, food, everything. In the hellish terrain of the Argonne Forest, units got lost, communications broke down, and the German resistance was just way tougher than anyone expected. The casualty rates were horrifying.
But, out of all that chaos, legends were forged. You had the incredible story of the Lost Battalion, an American unit that got cut off and surrounded for days but absolutely refused to surrender. You had individual heroes like Corporal Alvin York pulling off unbelievable feat. And the pressure went all the way to the top, forcing General Pershing to shake up his command right in the middle of the battle just to get the offensive moving again.
So, after weeks of just grinding, costly fighting, something started to shift. The American forces, now bloodied, but also a lot more experienced and better organized, were right on the verge of a decisive breakthrough.
And here it is, the turning point. It all came down to this one heavily fortified hill called the Côte de Châtillon. It had held off multiple bloody attacks, but finally, the 42nd Rainbow Division, with a young Brigadier General Douglas MacArthur leading from the front, managed to seize the high ground. That was it. They had cracked the spine of the Hindenburg Line. Once that main defensive line was broken, it was like the floodgates opened. The advance finally picked up speed. Relentless American attacks created an opening for their French allies to push forward too. By early November, they were closing in on the ultimate prize, that railroad at Sedan. The German army was on the verge of total collapse.
The battle was a victory, a massive, decisive victory, but it came at a staggering human price, one that has cemented the Meuse-Argonne's place in American history. Let's really try to put this cost into perspective, because the numbers are just huge. The number of American dead in those 47 days is comparable to the U.S. losses during the entire 2.5-month Normandy campaign in World War II. And it absolutely dwarfs the totals from iconic American battles like Gettysburg. The final statistics are just breathtaking. We're talking over 120,000 American casualties. That's killed and wounded, all to gain just 34 miles of ground. It was a victory, for sure, but one that was purchased with blood. It's a brutal testament to the sheer determination of the American soldier. And in the end, that's what did it. The relentless pressure from this offensive, combined with the other Allied attacks, was the final blow that broke the German army. With their last defensive line shattered and their supply lines about to be completely cut, they had no choice left. They had to ask for an armistice. The Meuse-Argonne Offensive was the battle that really announced America's arrival as a global military power. It proved that the nation could raise, train, and deploy a modern army that could tip the scales in a world war. But it was a brutal, painful birth, and it leaves us with this lingering question. At what cost was that power earned?